Kyle Hendricks, is this his last start for the Chicago Cubs? It's a yes or it's a no.
I think it may be, and I guess the Cubs are going to have to find a partner. But, if you go sell, he's a player that another team would want. I mean, can you imagine him going somewhere like Baltimore to give that young Orioles team that is so good the experience of having a guy that's been through a playoff and a World Series champion and pitching in Game 7 and all the stuff that he brings to the table? Sadly, it would be awful to have the last guy from 2016 that was on the Cubs World Series champion team not with the Cubs anymore. I mean, there's just something comforting about having a guy who was there when the curse was lifted, when we finally, beat the Billy Goat down with another franchise. But there were a lot of rumors that he was going to be traded last year, and of course he had the injury. And, I could see him being someone that would get a pretty good price. And where the Cubs are right now, I don't know. I just don't think that he's what they're looking at long term. Sorry.
You mentioned Baltimore. It's interesting because the Orioles have a third base prospect in Kobe Mayo, who's blocked by big leaguers, who's blocked by better prospects in the system. Basically, Kobe Mayo could potentially be available if you wanted to flip Kyle Hendricks. And what's so intriguing about Hendricks to other teams right now is not only is he really solid with an ERA under 3.4 right now and has had 3 quality starts in his last 5 games, you get control of him next year. He's got that club option for $16 million. So if you like what Kyle Hendricks brings to the table for your squad next year, then basically you have a year and a half and he's not your typical rental, which can net you a little bit more. So it begs the question, what can he net you? I look at a team like the Arizona Diamondbacks that have Zach Gallen, that have Merrill Kelly. He could be a great number 3. Could Kyle Hendricks on that team? Diamondbacks also have 2 pitchers in AAA having decent success that are top 5 prospects in their system. I'm looking at the 5th prospect, Blake Walston. He's touchdown in AAA, a 6'5 lefty with room to get a lot better. And I'm also looking at A.J. Vukovic, big right-handed power bat, was a finalist for Mr. Wisconsin in basketball. So he already is a Midwest guy, knows the area, and he is projected to potentially be a big league third baseman, which is something the Cubs are looking for right now.
Yeah, remember the Cubs traded Ryan Dempster to the Rangers to get Kyle Hendricks, and that was back when people didn't want to see Demp go, because we love Demp and, he was going to help the Rangers make a run. And now we're kind of at the other end of this with Kyle Hendricks. And, you're talking about some prospects. I think that the Cubs would really want to get back a young pitcher that could start for them because that's where they need help. That's where the teams win championships with starting pitching. And we saw that with, Kyle Hendricks. I mean, he was on a staff where he was like the 5th guy, back in 2016. And then by the end of the season, he was one of the most reliable options that the Cubs had, and so maybe going somewhere else, not only do you have him and where he slots in the rotation, but he's one of the smartest baseball players I've ever been around, it's next level knowledge of the game, the way that he is able to break down batters. It doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, I just watch a lot of video. It's his ability to watch video, watch the game at a live pace, and then, dig in there and figure out weaknesses with hitters. And that's going to help all of the pitchers, plus the confidence that this guy has. He's always been really quiet and confident. He's not a big talker, but he's actually, follow my lead type of guy. So those teams that are hoping, especially the young teams that are contending right now, there's the Rangers, the Orioles. Those are teams, the Diamondbacks you mentioned, that are young and they really think that they have a chance. Hendricks could be someone that you put in your rotation, and not only does he help you by pitching, maybe he's your third guy, but he also helps the other guys by just the experience that he has. He was a guy that a lot of people did not have on the prospect list, or he was down the line, but when you looked at his stats as a minor leaguer, he'd have like 100 and some strikeouts and like 10 walks, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like his ability, it just kept on getting better and better as he went up the system. And so the Cubs, it's up to them and their scouts to go out there and find the next Kyle Hendricks. If you trade Kyle Hendricks, and maybe it's a hard throwing guy, maybe it's somebody that just has amazing command, but you're right. I know where you're going with this. You're saying, hey, if they're just going to give you some, back end prospect, why not keep him?
Yeah. I mean, you have to know his worth at the end of the day, and his worth is he's a really good big league pitcher right now, and I think he's a number 3 in pretty much any rotation throughout baseball, aside from maybe 2 or 3 organizations. Kyle Hendricks, your favorite moment or your favorite quality about him as a player? Because you've known Kyle since, I guess, his early 20s, right?
Yeah. Well, my favorite, I got a couple. Okay. One of my favorite moments with him, I'm going to give you a few. First off, he was pitching for the Smokies, and of course, I'm their broadcaster. And I'm watching this team. The Barons had a guy that was like, I don't know, almost 30 years old, and he's in the league, and he's hitting all these home runs. And you're like, why is he in the league? Like, what are the White Sox doing with this guy? He should be in the big leagues. And then all of a sudden, somebody threw him an inside changeup, and I mean, he almost broke his neck trying to hit it. And I'm like, okay. And so I talked to, Kyle, and I'm like, everyone else is getting bombed by this guy, and he's not. And I'm like, do they not see that the guy can't hit this inside changeup? And he's like, he goes, man, I think the same thing. Like, I don't know. And you start, and this is just a kid, just a 20-year-old. And so I see him at Starbucks in Jackson, Tennessee before a game one day, and he's there. And I said, hey, you're going to be in the big leagues. You're going to be pretty good. And he just kind of had this look like, thanks, man. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. I'm not just telling you that, as Charlie takes a swig. You could see it all coming together. And so his dad's a great guy. I saw his dad, I think at spring training, and he's fighting for a spot. And I said, one day he's going to be the opening day starter. And his dad's like, hey, let's just get him into the, like one of the top 5 spots, But I've always had that kind of belief in him. And it's because I don't think that you have to overpower a batter to get him out. I don't think that I'm not so driven on these analytics that tell me that, we got to strike everybody out, and that's all it is. Look, there's pitch to contact. There's guys who can mix it up. There's guys that work against your strengths and your weaknesses, and he's one of those guys. He's special. I remember one bullpen he threw. And one of the other guys that was in the pitching staff was talking about his bullpens, and he'd throw 30 pitches and miss with 2 of them. And I said, there's a guy named Eric Jokic, and I'm like, is that not normal? And he's like, no, that's not that's not normal. Like, he just doesn't miss, So that's my favorite. Those are some of my favorite stories about him, as a person. But my favorite story about him, my favorite moment of his is just that World Series Game 7, where he just came in there and was so good. And I'm like, when Joe Madden and, try not to suck beer behind you, when he came and took him out of the game, I'm like, what are you doing? He was mowing down the Indians like they had no chance in that game. And you know how it turned out. It was just it didn't have to be the seesaw that it was, but we got rings, so I'm happy. But I'll never forget that, man. And there's just a kid out there on the mound. He's so competitive, and he's the last of the 2016 Cubs. I love him.
I would honestly hate to see him go. I would love to see him finish out next season as a Cub, pick up that option for $16 million, see what he can do for your squad next year. But I get it. At the end of the day, it's a business decision. If you get the right offer, you have to take it. Maybe you throw an offer to the Tampa Bay Rays, who have Curtis Mead, a third base prospect who's top 5 right now, is already in AAA, hitting pretty well for the Durham Bulls, and maybe he could be your starting third baseman next year, and you make that swap there. It's all about position of needs at this point. But you mentioned starting position or starting pitching is a position of need, and Kyle Hendricks would help this team next year. So would it be wise to dish him right now? Weigh the pros and the cons for me.
Look, I mean, I guess you as much as I hate to say it, I guess you really got to take serious any trade opportunities here, And so the pros are you get a starting pitcher, or maybe you get a catcher. As I think the Cubs system right now needs some more catchers. I think the Cubs need the catcher of the future. So maybe, even though I think you get pitching, when you give up pitching, you want to get pitching back. This was a draft that didn't have a lot of pitching in it. So, maybe you do that. The pros of trading him is that you expect to get something back that's going to help you. And you look at the system right now and the guys that are up and coming, these are all guys that were traded. And, so there's a wave of players that are going to be pushing and knocking on the door probably by spring training. So that'd be the pro. The con is that, he's still got juice in the tank. And this is a business, right? You want to have a face that you can sell. And look, every time you watch the Marquee Sports Network, they always have a 2016 special on. It's constant. You can't get away from it. And I get it. Look, man, it's the only World Series the team has won since since 1907 and 08 or whatever, but it's just cool having that last guy there. And I guess you could say, well, David Ross, the manager. So, yeah, those two guys, but the last player is Hendricks.